January 24th, 1989. Ted Bundy sat strapped to Florida's electric chair, 2,000 volts about to tear through his body. Outside, 500 people partied like it was New Year's Eve, chanting, "Burn, Bundy, burn." But Bundy's death was just one of many shocking ends these monsters would face. Here are 19 serial killers and how they died. May 10th, 1994. John Wayne Gacy lay strapped to a gurney at Stateville Correctional Center in Illinois, about to receive a lethal injection. But something went horribly wrong. The IV line clogged. For 10 to 20 minutes, Gacy lay there while technicians scrambled to fix the problem. The entire execution took 18 minutes instead of the usual few, creating a botched spectacle that embarrassed Illinois officials and forced them to revise their execution protocols. Gacy had murdered 33 young men and boys between 1972 and 1978, burying 26 of them in the crawl space beneath his suburban Chicago home. By day, he was a respected community member who performed as Pogo the Clown at children's parties. By night, he was a monster who lured victims with job offers, then handcuffed and strangled them. His last meal: a bucket of KFC original recipe chicken, a dozen fried shrimp, French fries, fresh strawberries, and Diet Coke. The irony: Gacy had once been a KFC restaurant manager. His final words were defiant: "Kiss my ass." Outside the prison, over 1,000 people gathered. They laid out 33 body bags, one for each victim, and sang "Goodbye, Gacy" to the tune of "Hello, Dolly." When his death was announced, the crowd erupted in cheers. But perhaps the strangest coincidence, his execution fell on the 26th anniversary of his first arrest for sodomy. He was 26 years old at the time. January 24th, 1989, 7:16 a.m. The electricity hit Ted Bundy's body like lightning. His fists clenched. His body jerked violently against the leather straps. And just like that, one of America's most notorious serial killers was gone. But here's the thing about Bundy's death. It wasn't just an execution, it was a celebration. Outside Florida State Prison, over 500 people showed up to party. They banged frying pans, chanted, "Burn, Bundy, burn," and even sold merchandise. A fraternity at Florida State held a cookout serving Bundy burgers and electrified hot dogs. The man who confessed to murdering at least 30 women across 7 states had finally met his end in Old Sparky, Florida's electric chair. Bundy spent his final hours giving interviews, including one where he blamed his crimes on pornography addiction. His last words: "Jim and Fred, I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." The execution took just minutes. 2,000 volts of electricity coursed through his body twice. Witnesses said he showed no emotion as he was strapped in, his head and right leg shaved for the electrodes. But the most twisted part:
Bundy requested his ashes be scattered over Washington's Cascade Mountains, the exact same location where he had dumped at least 4 of his victims' bodies. October 9th, 2002, Aileen Wuornos walked calmly into the execution chamber at Florida State Prison. She had killed 7 men along Florida highways while working as a prostitute, and now she was ready to die. In fact, she wanted to die. Wuornos had waived all her appeals, writing to Florida's Supreme Court, "I killed those men. There's no chance in keeping me alive or anything because I'd kill again. I have hate crawling through my system." Her last words were bizarre as the lethal injection began flowing through her veins. She said, "I'll be back, like Independence Day, with Jesus, June 6th, like the movie, Big Mothership and all. I'll be back." Then she was gone. Wuornos' story was tragic from the start. Her father had committed suicide in prison while serving time for raping a 7-year-old. Her mother abandoned her at age 4. By age 15, she was living in the woods and exchanging sex for food. Between 1989 and 1990, she shot and killed 7 middle-aged men, initially claiming self-defense, but later she admitted killing as cold as ice for robbery money. Her first victim, Richard Mallory, turned out to be a convicted rapist, a fact her trial lawyers never discovered. If they had, it might have supported her self-defense claim and changed everything. Years later, Charlize Theron would win an Oscar for portraying Wuornos in the film Monster. But by then, Aileen was long gone, her bizarre final words still echoing in that execution chamber.
January 17, 1977. Gary Gilmore sat strapped to a chair at Utah State Prison, facing 5 police officers with rifles aimed at his chest. When asked if he had any last words, he said 2 simple ones that would become legendary. "Let's do it." Gilmore had murdered 2 young men in Utah, gas station attendant Max Jensen and motel clerk Ben Bushnell, during robberies in 1976. But his crimes weren't what made him famous. His death was. Gilmore became the first person executed in America after the Supreme Court reinstated the death penalty in 1976, ending a 10-year moratorium. And here's the twist. He demanded to be executed, while the ACLU fought to save him against his wishes. He even attempted suicide twice while awaiting execution, desperate to die. When the black hood was placed over his head, he spoke one last time in Latin to the priest beside him. "Dominus vobiscum, the Lord be with you." Then the rifles fired. 4 of the 5 shooters had live rounds. One supposedly had a blank, so no one would know who delivered the fatal shot. But Gilmore's brother later examined the execution shirt and found 5 bullet holes. The state had taken no chances. And here's something most people don't know. Gilmore's famous phrase, "Let's do it," inspired Dan Whedon to create Nike's iconic "Just Do It" slogan years later. June 11, 2001. Timothy McVeigh lay on a gurney at the federal prison in Terre Haute, Indiana, about to become the first person executed by the federal government in 38 years. He showed no emotion. McVeigh declined to make a final statement. Instead, he handed officials a handwritten copy of the poem Invictus, which ended with the lines, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." As the lethal injection began, witnesses said McVeigh made deliberate eye contact with everyone in the chamber, his supporters, media, and victims' relatives. One victim's brother described it as a look of defiance that suggested, if he could, he'd do it all over again. McVeigh had detonated a truck bomb at Oklahoma City's federal building on April 19, 1995, killing 168 people, including 19 children in a daycare. It remains the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in U.S. history. A Gulf War veteran, McVeigh had been radicalized by the Waco and Ruby Ridge incidents. He timed his attack to the anniversary of the Waco siege. His only expressed regret, not completely destroying the building. In an unprecedented move, 232 survivors and victims' families watched the execution via closed-circuit video in Oklahoma City, the first execution ever broadcast to a remote location. McVeigh's last meal was simple: 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. And then he was gone, declared dead at 7:14 a.m. November 28, 1994. Jeffrey Dahmer was mopping the floor in the gymnasium bathroom at Columbia Correctional Institution when fellow inmate Christopher Scarver approached him with a 20-inch metal bar. Scarver had been waiting for this moment. He confronted Dahmer with a newspaper clipping detailing his horrific crimes: 17 murders involving philia. According to Scarver, Dahmer's last words were, "I don't care if I live or die. Go ahead and kill me." So Scarver did. He beat Dahmer to death with the metal bar, crushing his skull. Dahmer was pronounced dead an hour later. The Milwaukee Bull had kept painted skulls as decorations, stored heads in his refrigerator, and dissolved bodies in acid vats. Most of his victims were young gay men he'd lured from bars with offers of money or alcohol. But here's the ironic twist. Dahmer had become a born-again Christian in prison, baptized just 6 months before his murder. He had even survived an earlier attack when an inmate tried to slit his throat in the chapel. The razor blade snapped. This time, there was no miraculous survival. The 3 inmates had been left unsupervised in the gymnasium for 20 minutes. That's all it took for Scarver to deliver his own brand of justice. November 25th, 1973. Albert DeSalvo lay in his bed in the Walpole State Prison Infirmary, about to reveal something important about the Boston Strangler murders. He never got the chance. Someone stabbed him to death that night. DeSalvo had confessed to strangling 13 women in Boston between 1962 and 1964. Though he was never formally charged with the murders, only convicted of unrelated rapes. His confession remained controversial for decades until DNA evidence finally confirmed his involvement in 2013.
40 years after his death. But the timing of his murder was suspicious. He was killed the night before he was scheduled to meet with his doctor about something important to say about the Boston Strangler murders. Defense attorney F. Lee Bailey later claimed DeSalvo was killed for selling prison amphetamines below the syndicate-enforced price. Others believe he was silenced before revealing information about accomplices. The murder remains officially unsolved. Whatever secrets the Boston Strangler was about to reveal died with him, murdered within the supposedly secure walls of a maximum security prison. November 13, 1994, Daniel Camargo Barbosa walked through Garcia Moreno prison in Ecuador, unaware that his past was about to catch up with him. Fellow inmate Giovanni Noguera had been waiting for this moment. Noguera was the nephew of one of Camargo's victims, and he'd come to prison with a mission. He stabbed Camargo to death. Camargo had murdered an estimated 72 to 150 virgin girls across Colombia and Ecuador. In 1984, he'd escaped from Colombia's inescapable Gorgona Island prison by building a boat and studying ocean currents. Authorities reported he'd been eaten by sharks, but he wasn't dead. He'd sailed to Ecuador, where he killed 72 more girls before his capture in 1986. When arrested, Camargo was carrying Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, a novel about guilt after murder. Yet he showed no remorse for his own crimes. The man who escaped an inescapable prison and evaded police for years couldn't escape a relative's vengeance within prison walls. Justice, it seemed, had finally been served, just not by the courts. January 13, 2004. Dr. Harold Shipman tied bedsheets to the window bars of his cell at HM Prison Wakefield. It was one day before his 58th birthday. Shipman is believed to have murdered 215 to 250 patients over 23 years as a trusted family physician in northern England. He administered lethal injections of medical-grade heroin during home visits, then signed death certificates citing natural causes. Most victims were elderly women living alone. His downfall came when he forged a patient's will to inherit $386,000. Her daughter, a solicitor, noticed inconsistencies and contacted the police. But why the suicide? Shipman reportedly told a probation officer he was considering it so his wife, Primrose, would receive his full NHS pension and lump sum. She wouldn't have been entitled if he lived past 60. So the man who controlled when hundreds of others died chose the precise timing of his own death. Home Secretary David Blunkett's reaction captured the public mood. You wake up and receive a call telling you Shipman has topped himself and you think, is it too early to open a bottle? January 1st, 1995. Fred West hanged himself in his cell at HM Prison Birmingham using an improvised rope made from a blanket and laundry bag tags. It was New Year's Day. West, along with his wife Rose, had murdered at least 12 people, including 2 of their own daughters and Fred's first wife. Bodies were buried in the cellar and garden of their house of horrors at 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester. He left notes to Rose, as in life, as in death. Our love will never die.
I will give it to you, my darling.
West's suicide robbed victims' families of a courtroom reckoning. One victim's mother said, "After all the evil things he did, this must be the only good thing he ever did." Rose West was convicted of 10 murders and remains imprisoned with a whole life sentence. The house was demolished to prevent it from becoming a tourist attraction for the morbidly curious. February 14, 1994, Andrei Chikatilo stood in a room at Novocherkassk prison in Russia. It was Valentine's Day, a holiday celebrating love. A single gunshot behind his right ear ended his life. Chikatilo had murdered at least 52 people across the Soviet Union between 1978 and 1990. Men lured from train stations with promises of food or shelter, then subjected to ritual, cannibalism. A biological anomaly had helped him evade capture for years. His blood type didn't match the found at crime scenes. An innocent man, Alexander Kravchenko, was even executed in 1984 for Chikatilo's first murder, but eventually, the butcher of Rostov was caught. His self-description was chilling.
I am a mistake of nature, a mad beast.
And so the
Actual sadist died on Valentine's Day, buried in an unmarked grave within the prison cemetery. July 2, 1931, Peter Kurten finished his last meal at Klingelputz prison in Cologne. Wiener Schnitzel, fried potatoes, and white wine. Then he asked for a second helping. Kurten, the vampire of Dusseldorf, had murdered at least 9 people in 1929, victims ranging from age 5 to 45. He occasionally drank their blood, achieving actual climax during the attacks. As he was led to the guillotine, he asked the prison psychiatrist one final question. "Tell me, after my head is chopped off, will I still be able to hear, at least for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from the stump of my neck? That would be the pleasure to end all pleasures." At 6 a.m., the blade fell. Today, Kurten's mummified head is displayed at Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum in Wisconsin. It was taken to America after World War II. June 17, 2008. Tsutomu Miyazaki woke up in his cell at Tokyo Detention House, unaware this would be his last day alive. In Japan, prisoners aren't told about their execution until the morning it happens. Miyazaki had murdered 4 Dutch girls in the Tokyo area between 1988 and 1989, engaging in philia, dismemberment, and cannibalism. Born with deformed hands, he'd been bullied throughout childhood and retreated into anime, manga, and photography. Police found 5,963 videotapes in his home. He'd sent taunting letters to victims' families, including a box containing 220 bone fragments and 10 baby teeth with a typed note: "Mari, bones, cremated, investigate, prove." The warrant was signed and executed the same day. Miyazaki was hanged. His murder sparked a nationwide moral panic against otaku culture in Japan, permanently stigmatizing anime and manga fans. The man who collected horror films about murder became Japan's most notorious modern horror story. October 8, 2001. Javed Iqbal was found dead in his cell at Kot Lakpat Jail in Lahore, Pakistan. Officials ruled it a suicide bomb by but the evidence suggested otherwise. Iqbal had confessed to murdering 100 boys aged 6 to 16 in Lahore, strangling them with a chain, then dissolving their bodies in vats of acid. He kept photographs of all 100 victims and maintained a journal documenting each murder. Judge Allah Bakhsh Ranja had delivered perhaps history's most poetic sentence: "You will be strangled to death in front of the parents whose children you killed. Your body will then be cut into 100 pieces and put in acid, the same way you killed the children." But Pakistan's Human Rights Commission ruled the sentence violated international law. When Iqbal died, autopsies revealed he'd been beaten prior to death. Blood-splashed necks showed strangulation marks suggesting murder, not suicide. His accomplice died the same night under identical suspicious circumstances. Vigilante justice, it seemed, had delivered what the courts couldn't. Iqbal's body went unclaimed. September 1999, Pedro Alonso Lopez walked into a Bogotá registry office to renew his ID card. Then he vanished. Lopez, the monster of the Andes, had confessed to murdering over 300 girls across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. He led police to a mass burial site containing over 50 bodies. Convicted of 110 murders in Ecuador, he received the country's maximum sentence, 16 years. He was released in 1994 for good behavior and deported to Colombia, where he was briefly held before being released in 1998. Before his release, Lopez told psychiatrists, "I'll be happy to kill again. It's my mission." He's been missing for over 25 years. Interpol issued an arrest warrant in 2002 that was deactivated in 2005. He would be approximately 77 years old now. The terrifying question remains, is he still out there? And if so, is he still killing? One of history's most prolific serial killers served just 14 years and disappeared into obscurity, the ultimate failure of justice. October 12, 2023. Luis Garavito lay dying in a Colombian hospital, his body ravaged by terminal illnesses, severe eye cancer, leukemia, tuberculosis. Then his heart stopped. Garavito had confessed to murdering over 140 children, mostly street children and orphans. He used disguises, including priest robes, to approach victims, took them to remote areas, then tortured, potated, mutilated them. Sentenced to 1,153 years, Colombia's longest sentence ever. His imprisonment was capped at 22 years due to Colombian law. He was eligible for parole in 2023 and had announced plans to become a pastor and politician to help abused children upon release. But cancer delivered the justice Colombian law couldn't. The disease left him blind and requiring daily blood transfusions. He died just as parole was being discussed. Divine justice, some called it. June 7th, 2013. Richard Ramirez died quietly in a California hospital bed. No witnesses, no final statement, no execution chamber. Just cancer slowly shutting his body down. The man the media called the Night Stalker didn't meet death the way he promised it to others. He faded out from complications of B-cell lymphoma, chained to a bed, guarded and forgotten by the public that once feared him. Between 1984 and 1985, Ramirez terrorized Los Angeles during a brutal crime spree that seemed almost random in its cruelty. He broke into homes at night, shooting male victims first, then raping, torturing, and murdering women. He used knives, guns, tire irons, whatever was nearby. Age didn't matter. Gender didn't matter. Some victims survived by pretending to be dead. Others never got the chance. At several crime scenes, Ramirez drew pentagrams on the walls. He forced victims to swear loyalty to Satan. He wanted fear to linger long after he left the room. When he was finally captured, beaten, and detained by civilians after being recognized from news photos, Los Angeles exhaled. The nightmare was over, or so it seemed. In court, Ramirez reveled in the attention. At sentencing, he declared, "I am beyond good and evil. Lucifer dwells in us all." It was a theater, and for a while it worked. He became infamous. Letters poured in. Admirers sent photos. Some even married him while he sat on death row, but Satan didn't save him. Ramirez was sentenced to death in 1989 for 13 murders, though investigators believe the true number may be higher. He spent nearly 24 years on California's death row as appeals crawled through the system. Execution dates came and went. Nothing happened. By the time cancer took him, he was just another aging inmate in a hospital gown. Richard Ramirez became the 59th California death row prisoner to die of natural causes while awaiting execution. The man who promised hell on earth never faced the punishment he was sentenced to. He died quietly, far more peacefully than any of his victims ever did. November 19, 2017, Charles Manson died in a California hospital at age 83, his frail body finally giving out after nearly half a century behind bars. The man who once terrified America didn't die in flames or violence. He died quietly, surrounded by guards, tubes, and machines. By then, Manson was more symbol than human. He had been imprisoned since 1969 for orchestrating one of the most infamous crime sprees in U.S. history. The Tate LaBianca murders. 7 people were slaughtered over 2 nights in Los Angeles, including 8.5 months pregnant actress Sharon Tate. The killings were savage. Victims were stabbed dozens of times. Words like pig were written in blood on the walls. And yet Charles Manson never physically killed anyone. Instead, he manipulated. He controlled. He twisted vulnerable young followers, mostly runaways and broken kids, into believing he was a prophet. He preached about an apocalyptic race war he called Helter Skelter, and convinced his followers that murder was not only justified, but necessary. When he spoke, they listened. When he ordered, they obeyed. That was the most chilling part. In 1971, Manson and several of his followers were sentenced to death, but a year later, California temporarily abolished capital punishment, and his sentence was automatically commuted to life in prison. He would never walk free again. Over the decades, Manson became a cultural obsession. Interviews, books, documentaries. His wild eyes, rambling speeches, and carved swastika turned him into a grotesque pop culture figure, sometimes even treated like a curiosity instead of what he truly was, the architect of mass murder. Behind bars, he was violent, manipulative, and constantly seeking attention. He was denied parole repeatedly, No board ever believed he was rehabilitated. No one believed he was safe. By the time he died, most of his followers were either dead or elderly themselves. The cult was gone. The threat was gone. All that remained was the damage. Charles Manson spent nearly 50 years in prison, not because he wielded the knife, but because he proved something far more unsettling, that words, influence, and unchecked charisma can be just as deadly as violence itself. May 12, 2018, Dennis Nilsen lay on a hospital bed, barely conscious, his body shutting down after decades behind bars. Britain's answer to Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't dying quietly. His final hours were slow, painful, and chaotic. An official ombudsman report later revealed just how grim it was. Nilsen had been left unattended as his condition deteriorated for over 2 hours. No ambulance was called in time. At one point, he was reportedly lying in his own excrement, too weak to move, while his organs failed. This wasn't justice. It was neglect, layered on top of a lifetime of horror. And Dennis Nilsen knew horror. Between 1978 and 1983, he murdered at least 15 men in London, though many investigators believe the real number may be higher. He targeted the vulnerable, drifters, runaways, men who wouldn't be immediately missed. He killed them, bathed their bodies, dressed them, and kept them close, not out of rage, but loneliness. Nilsen didn't just kill. He lived with the dead. He stored corpses under floorboards, in closets, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months. He talked to them, watched television with them, slept beside them. When decomposition made that impossible, he burned the bodies and tried to erase them, flushing remains down the toilet, bit by bit. That's how it ended. Plumbers were called to his North London apartment to fix blocked drains. What they found wasn't hair or grease. It was human flesh, bone fragments, evidence no one could explain away. Nilsen was arrested without resistance. He confessed calmly, no theatrics, no denial. In 1983, he was sentenced to life in prison. He would spend 34 years there, writing letters, giving interviews, and expressing more frustration about being misunderstood than remorse for what he'd done. When death finally came in 2018, it was caused by a pulmonary embolism and a ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm. He was 72 years old. Some say his final suffering was fitting. Others say it crossed a line, no matter who he was. But here's the question that lingers long after his death. When a monster finally reaches the end, do we judge a society by how it punishes him or by how it lets him die?